Darkness falls, and the magic of words come alive. This is Gargoyle's Reading Hour. This evening, we are looking at a reading piece from J.A. Duxbury, a brilliantly talented lady out of Australia. So sit back and enjoy. And always, the focus is on the words, never on the person behind the camera. My name is the Gargoyle. I am your reader on the ledge. John Dell pulled his way through the corridors. Another meeting. Why couldn't they just leave him alone to get on with his work? He sighed heavily. Well, they were the ones allowing him the opportunity to work here, so they had some priority. He approached the conjunction of other corridors and stopped as two other scientists went past. They waved as they saw him, and he pulled himself in behind them. Well, Ellen, what do you think has prompted this interruption of our routines? Haven't you heard? Ellen's companion answered for her. Dell frowned slightly. He must have been engrossed. No, what? Ellen broke in. The probe came back. It did? Yes, so we've been called to this meeting to see the first transmission from the comet. Without seeing her face, Dell imagined her elfin features lighting up. I take it you're looking forward to seeing what it's found. What are you hoping for? I don't know really. I've been too busy working on what I brought up with me to think about it. Dell opened his mouth to answer, then was distracted by their arrival at the conference room. There was already a line, so the three took their place at the end and waited patiently. Finally, they came to the double doors and went through, glancing and nodding at the doorkeepers as they did so, before hunting for spare seats to occupy. When all three had sat and drawn their anchoring straps around them, they turned their attention to the podium directly in front of the wall, which served as a viewing screen. There, General Diagro stood facing them, waiting for silence before speaking. Ladies and gentlemen, thank you for coming at such short notice. We only received the transmission a little over 4 hours ago. We thought you should all view what the probe has discovered so that you all know where your field will reside. We have already done numerous copies of the transmission. You will find access to these through the network. Please feel free to download them to your personal workstations. He arranged his attention across the audience and noted that everyone had taken their seats. He turned his eyes to the man standing beside the door and received information in a small gesture to indicate that no one else was expected. Okay, everyone, please enjoy the tape. I know I have. Please hold all questions until the end of the tape. However, feel free to take notes down. He turned the microphone off and vacated the podium so that the audience would not have the distraction of his figure standing to the side of the screen. A hush settled over the audience as the screen lit up. The probe advanced on the tail. Sorry for that. Already, some of the attendees were beginning to take notes. Those who were interested in the trajectory, speed, and fuel required to reach the probe at such speed. There were also those who were interested in how the passing of the probe interacted with a vacuum environment. Then the picture cut off, and the next scene was of a glowing background with a dark mass in its center. The general smiled as he saw almost all of the scientists take out pens or pencils and start taking notes. Some even dug out recorders and began verbally recording their notes, thoughts, and ideas. All, however, had their eyes glued to the picture of the comet as recorded by the probe. The tape went on only for a few more moments. Then the transmission had ended, and the screen went dark. The lights came up slowly. As they did so, the general made his way back to the podium. He studied the scientist in front of him, seeing the barely controlled excitement, the unvoiced questions. They were like students, desperate to ask questions, but conditioned by his uniform not until permitted. He decided to give that permission, raising his hand in a questioning motion. As predicted, all the scientists spoke at once, their questions becoming gibberish in the commotion. He let them continue for a moment, then raised his hand once more in a halting gesture. The sudden silence was complete, and he waited a few moments before speaking. All right, I notice you all have questions to be answered. I'll do the best I can. Please, be aware that I do not have the knowledge for all the answers. In fact, most of you will probably find your own answers to your own questions when you study your copy of the tape. But I will endeavor to answer any questions you may have as long as they are asked, one at a time. He moved his gaze across the audience, and this time only a few hands punched the air above the heads of their fellow scientists. Picking one with his eyes, he called the scientist's name, Dr. Bracknell. Ellen Bracknell rose as high as she could without undoing her anchoring strap and spoke. General, are there any more transmissions expected from the probe? Diogero's eyes widened in surprise. He had expected all kinds of questions, but this one, a scientist with a brain outside of her field. Yes, Doctor, we are expecting more transmissions. However, we will simply copy those transmissions and send them to your workstations, where you can work on them in peace, rather than have a big meeting like we have today. We only made this one a major meeting as it was the first transmission. If you like an inaugural presentation. Ellen nodded and took her seat. Diagro arranged his sight across the audience and chose another. Dr. Wendell. The scientist in question rose from his seat, anchoring himself with a foot. Have any other scientific personnel seen this footage, or are we the first? You're the first, sir. Wendell pursed his lips. Then there's very little point in us asking you questions, is there? I mean, if we're the ones supposed to be studying this tape, then we're the ones who will be supplying the answers to your own questions, aren't we? That's what you were implying, weren't you? Diagoro lowered his eyes. Yes, I'm afraid so, Doctor. Wendell scowled, then began making his way to the door. Okay, that's what I'm going to do then. John Dell watched the scientist go, then shook his head and undid the strap, which anchored him to his seat. That's two of us, Lighton, he muttered to himself as he pulled himself along the backs of the chairs towards the door. As he neared the entrance, he glanced back and saw that everyone else was emulating himself and Wendell. Dell relaxed back in his contoured chair. He blinked his eyes twice, then turned to the bulb floating in the air beside his head. Reaching out, he grabbed it by the small stalk and brought it down to his mouth. Taking a small sip, he savored the flavor of the juice before taking a bigger mouthful. Letting the bulb float gently to the side, he rubbed both hands across his face, breathing deeply and slowly, letting the breath go. Then he sat upright once more and leaned inwards towards the computer monitor on which the tape from the probe was paused. Rolling the pointing device, he began the video moving once more, paying close attention to the background. Shaking his head, he stopped the video entirely, then began from the beginning, slowing its replay drastically. As the recording advanced, his hands rested on the speed control, ready to alter its playback at a moment's decision. There! His hand reduced the rate of playback once more, so that the computer was playing the sequence virtually frame by frame. Again, Dell sat back away from the monitor, then quickly froze the scene. Saving the sequence to a network drive, he rolled his chair back on its tracks, then undid his anchoring strap and propelled himself towards the door. At the opening, He glanced right and left down the deserted corridor and then pulled himself in the correct direction. Passing 3 doors, he turned right into the next one, pressing the announcing button. Receiving permission to enter, he keyed the door open and advanced into the room. Almost immediately, he stopped as the door slid shut, appalled by the conditions in the room. Normally taken up by 3 or 4 computer technicians, the room had only 2 occupants. Dell decided that any more people in the room would constitute a third world country from the 20th century. Floating at various levels were objects which looked like pizza, large bulbs of carbonated drinks, and pieces of paper of various sizes. Some of the paper had adhered to some of the pizza, and Dell's mouth curled in derision as he saw the mess. One of the occupants turned around from where he faced his computer monitor and greeted the scientist. Then, as Dell stood there, absorbing the scene, their entire station shuddered, seemed to turn on its side, and gravity came back strongly. So the scientist was forced back into the door and almost cried out as various pieces of debris fell on top of him. As he lay there, he noted in the background a siren wailing its pulsating cry. He looked up as the 2 computer technicians held onto the seats they were strapped to, hanging over the edges, looks of utter surprise on their faces. The scene held for a few more moments until the station shuddered once more and gravity left them. Realizing the debris was no longer held down by gravity, Dell pushed pieces from him, then pushed them aside as his balanced centers endeavored to put his environment onto an even keel. One of the technicians blinked, attempting to come to terms with what had just happened. His expression was one of immense concentration. Dell watched as the technician turned gradually green before he turned aside and pushed himself to the room off to the side of the technician's work area. Following the technician with his eyes, Dell turned back to the remaining technician, a question in his eyes. The technician smiled tentatively. He's okay. Just ate a pepperoni slice before the glitch. Hey, Doc, what can we do for you? Dell swallowed a sour taste, which had suddenly arrived in his mouth at the other's words before pushing himself towards the workstations. At least he didn't have to wade through the debris which had been floating. It was now piled on the wall or surfaces which had constituted the floor for a few minutes. As he neared the other, he held his hand out to catch the back of the vacant chair. I came across a few spots in the tape. I was wondering if the tape could be enhanced to more detail in those areas. Sure, we can try. It depends on what the spots cover, if anything at all. Closing his hand on the back of the chair, Dell continued, I've saved the sequence to the network, so rather than enhancing the whole tape, let's just see what the sequence holds and how much more resolution we can get out of it. Hopefully, it's not just dust motes or something. No problem, Doc. Whatever it is, we'll find out in a few moments. Do you want to call the file up? Sure. Seating myself in the missing technician's chair, Dell strapped himself in and began the process of accessing his saved sequence of frames. Here we go. He typed in a command which would allow the technician access as well. Now, if you advance it a few frames, he did so as he spoke. You'll see the spots I was talking about. There, that's them. If we can increase the resolution on those, I think we'll either have a very clean recording or some very unusual information. After a few seconds' silence, the technician spoke. No probs, Doc. He busied himself with the computer's keyboard for a while, then spoke once more. There you are, Doc. That's about the best we can get. Tell me what you think it is. It's not exactly what I thought we'd find. Doc, are you seeing this? Hearing no response, the technician looked over at the scientist and smiled slightly as he saw the surprise on the scientist's face. Dell sat there in silence, trying to come to terms with what his eyes were telling him. At first, he thought it was a mistake, that the enhancing had proceeded incorrectly, and he voiced his concern. Nope, sorry, Doc. It's absolutely correct. What you're seeing is what on those frames. There's no possibility of contamination. Both looked up as the door to the other room slid open. The second technician came into the work area, a look of interest on his face. What's up? The first technician looked over at his work colleague. Oh, the doc just wanted some enhancements done on a section of the tape. Yeah? What did you find? See for yourself. The first technician spun the monitor on its axis until it faced his colleague. The other's eyes widened and his mouth dropped open. Then he looked at the other questioning. Shaking his head, the other technician answered the unvoiced question. Nope, it came through clear. That's exactly what's on the tape. Both turned to the scientist as he made a move. I don't want any of this getting out onto the network. Do you have a floppy I can borrow? I'll return it when I've downloaded this sequence onto my workstation. He looked at the two of them. Not a word of this to anyone. Agreed? The two nodded. The first technician passed over a disk to Dell. After saving the sequence to the disk, he spent a few moments looking for a pen to label the disk with before blinking hard and retrieving the pen from his forehead. The two technicians looked away, both hiding smiles. Alone in his quarters, John Dell floated above his bed in a reclined position. His mind raced with the possibilities of what he had seen on the tape enhanced. He contemplated what would happen when his discovery was made public. Or should it? He closed his eyes and again beheld the figures flying in the tail of the comet. The questions that begged to be answered were too numerous to count. Opening his eyes, he tried to imagine what it must be like to live in that manner, where the wonder of a comet was clearly common knowledge. From that thought came the obvious one. It was too big a discovery to keep to himself, so he would need someone to trust, someone to share the knowledge with, besides the technicians who had enhanced the tape. But who? He closed his eyes once more and let his mind float freely. He had used this method before to work out various problems. It was almost as good as the old method of sleeping on a problem. There was the face of Ellen. He thought a bit longer on the subject, then decided that he would tell her. Spinning about, he placed the soles of his feet against what he considered to be the ceiling of his quarters and pushed off, heading for his communicator. Ellen Bracknell rose slowly onto her elbows. Yeah, what is it? She called out. Her eyes were glued together, and she could not bother trying to open them until the caller identified themselves and their reason for calling. It's me, Jack. I've got something to show you. Can I visit? Ellen groaned subvocally. Do you have any idea of what time it is? Jack, you know I'm no good at night. I've only just got to bed. Open your eyes, Ellie. It's 5 a.m. The surprise of this comment made her open her eyes quickly. What? She checked her clock and saw that he was right. What are you doing up this early? It's too early even for me. I told you, I have discovered something, and I need to discuss it with you. Slowly, she sat upright, rubbing her eyes as she did so. There, the gum which had coated her eyes was loose, and she could open them without discomfort. At the same time, her alarm announced that her wake-up signal was due in 30 minutes. Jack, this is too early. What did you do? Stay up all night? Yes, I did, Ellie. I need you. I need to see you, face to face. Again she groaned. Give me 30 minutes, then come over. That'll give me time to freshen up. You do want me to pay full attention, don't you? Definitely. I'll see you at 5:30. And thanks, Ellie. This was the short story, Aster, by the amazing lady J.A. Duxbury. If you want to see any more of her work, I'm going to place a link below. If you want to follow me on Instagram, I will also place a link below. Thank you so much for listening. And as always, I am the Gargoyle, your reader on the ledge.